just wanted to say welcome to everybody. It's lovely to have Kim here to talk to us, to introduce his book, which I know he's got a copy here, and he'll tell us all about, getting and that sort of thing. So welcome. It's lovely to have you back talking to us, and we'll look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Now, Kim did say he wants to do his presentation, which is about an hour's long, and then we'll leave questions to the end. Okay, so just to be aware of that. If you've got any questions, note them down. But I'll hand over to Kim.
Thanks very much, David. Thanks very much for the opportunity to present some of the highlights from the book, some of the more important points. Now, this book was written and published in 2021, and today I'm just going to be doing a brief tour of the book, just highlighting certain bits and pieces. So what I aim to do is give you a more holistic understanding of spirituality, and in doing that I want to show some important connections between the various topics that I cover throughout the book, and the topics that you'll come across when you are reading or investigating spirituality, and enable you to make better sense of spirituality, and also, most importantly, better understand what makes us truly human, because that's at the core of spirituality, and then demystify the spiritual growth process. Okay, so my background, I'm an engineer and a qualified careers practitioner. I'm a long-term member of the New Church in Victoria. In that time, I've read many of Swedenborg's books. I've also read some other contemporary books. I've attended many church seminars, co-presented a course on spirituality. I've been a brief student and a long-term patient of kinesiology, and I'm an author of this book, An Introduction to Spirituality. So in the book, the main works that I refer to and tie together works from Emanuel Swedenborg, who, as some of you know, is an engineer, was an engineer, a scientist, a mystic, and an author. Barbara Brennan, you might not have heard of her, but she also was a scientist. She used to work for NASA, and she was also a psychotherapist, a healer and teacher, and an author. And Dr. David Hawkins, and he was a psychiatrist, a mystic, consciousness researcher, and an author. And these are all these three people made great contributions in their areas. So the topics that I'm going to cover tonight or in this presentation are the benefits of spiritual growth, the reason for our creation and life in general, our amazing human makeup, the process of spiritual growth, our spiritual compass, how to be on track with our life's purpose, and the levels of spiritual growth and how that fits in with our life. So, first of all, the benefits of spiritual growth, and I'm referring to the benefits in this life, not in the afterlife at all so much. In the book I do talk about the afterlife, but not in this talk tonight. So we will have healthier relationships with others and life in general. We'll also have more peace in our mind. All of us suffer at various times from negative self-talk, and that will be decreased as we grow spiritually. We'll also experience true happiness more often, not just the fact of having, having pleasant feelings because we've, say, for example, gained something selfishly. That is not true happiness. So we'll actually gain true happiness more often, and we'll also have periods of joy experienced more often, and we'll be less often in negative states such as anxiety, worry, anger, fear, and other negative states. So that's pretty important. So now looking at the reason for our creation and life in general, well, Swedenborg, he highlights all these points that are on this slide. He says that creation cannot come from nothing, because nothing comes from nothing. So creation came and continues to come from God, or the divine. And nothing is the invisible realm of the divine, full of potentiality. So in other words, full of potentiality is full of the potential to create. That is part of what the divine, it's part of what the divine offers. God's ultimate goal is to form a heaven of angels from mankind. So, knowing that it's the ultimate goal is to form a heaven of angels from mankind, there's other aspects of spirituality that come together to facilitate that happening for us. So all creation takes place in the spiritual universe or spiritual world. So the effects of creation, they're ultimately manifest in the physical world. So when I say ultimately, I mean the end result is a manifestation in the physical world, but the actual creation is starting in the spiritual world. And it's an appearance that creation takes place in the physical world. And that's pretty important. So now we'll have a look at our amazing human being, our makeup. So, don't know if you've seen a diagram like this in the past, but we start off with our soul, which is the highest level in our being. And then the next highest, or the next highest, is the higher mind. It's also known as the higher self. Then the next one down from that is the lower mind, which is also known as the lower self. Swedenborg calls that our natural mind. And then we've got our auric field. And in our auric field, we've got our spiritual body and what can be called our invisible physical body. And then stepping down to the lowest level is our physical body. So that's our makeup as a human being, much more than just the physical body that we often associate ourselves with. So our human being, amazing human being, exists on several levels other than the physical, as I've just shown you in that previous slide. So we all share, and this is important, we all share varying degrees of wonderful aspects gifted to us from the divine. They're gifted to us, but they're not ours. We don't own them, they're God's, but they're gifted to us to use. So we're energized from the spiritual world and the physical world. And our spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical well-being is affected by our reception and distribution of the energy that flows throughout our being. So I'll talk more about that ahead. So why are we talking about Swedenborg and Brennan, and eventually I'll be talking about Dr. David Hawkins? Well, Swedenborg wrote mainly about our soul, mind and physical body, our higher mind or higher self, our lower mind, natural mind or lower self. And Barbara Brennan wrote mainly about our auric field. She, as I said, was a healer. She was a teacher of healing. She had her own school that taught others how to heal. And she wrote several books, very excellent books about the spiritual body, about the invisible physical body, about our chakras and meridians. And she writes very well. She was a scientist, so like Swedenborg. Now, why understand our auric field? Well, different parts of our auric field affect our mental functioning, affect our emotional functioning and our physical well-being. So this functioning is on a higher level than our physical functioning. And likewise, the functioning of our mind is on a higher level than what takes place with our auric field. So what you can get from this is that on a physical level, we feel things physically very distinctly. Aurically, we also feel things, but less distinctly, more subtly. And then from our mind, we feel things even less subtly again, right? But all those areas, they operate on a different level. They operate together as a single system in a holographic sense. And they're all important to make us function in this world. So as I pointed out in that diagram before, the areas that are being from highest to lowest level, the soul, our mind, higher mind and lower mind, auric field and physical body. So, and that's how the energy flows through our being. And I'll show you that in this slide here. So what you've got here, this is just a little bit more detail than that earlier diagram. You can see the energy, well, influx from God flows into our soul. That's not shown on the slide, but it does, of course. And then that influx is energy is transformed, and it flows into our higher mind. It's transformed and then flows into our lower mind. It's transformed and flows into our auric field. It's transformed and flows into our physical body. Right? So it's transformed from level to level. Now, an important thing about our lower mind, which is the part of our mind that we're most aware of, is that when we're acting from goodness, we're drawing upon influx from our higher mind and influx from angels, and it has a positive effect. That energy, it has a positive effect on our auric field and on our physical body. In a converse way, when we're in selfish states, the influx from our higher mind is united with influx from evil spirits, and that has a negative effect as it flows into our auric field, and it's damaging to our auric field, and it's damaging to our physical body. And I know that you might say, well, I don't feel it, but it's all subtle, and you can actually feel damage happening to you depending upon how well developed you are spiritually. The higher you go, the more you will actually feel when you move into negative states. And you can actually feel the positive states more as well. So the flow of energy into us, the influx, as Swinburne calls it. So God's love and wisdom, which is his life, flows from the highest spiritual level to the lowest level, which is a physical level. So it's basically flowing from God into the celestial heaven, which is the highest heaven, then into the spiritual heaven, which is the second highest heaven, then into the spiritual natural heaven, which is the third highest heaven, then into the physical, which is nature. And God's life also flows through the heavens and into the hells. So that's the flow of influx. So we're connected and we receive influx from God, but we also receive influx both from the heavens and the hells, and that gives us our free will. But this influx, it allows us to live and it allows us to develop spiritually. You can either develop in a positive sense or in a negative sense, moment to moment. So our conscious awareness, as I was saying earlier, derives from our lower mind. Our brain functions with the rest of our auric field to interface our mind with the rest of our body. Right? So the brain has that role, and it's a very direct role. We have a brain injury, and we definitely know about it. We have an injury in our auric field, we don't feel it so much. Right? If our intention is goodness, it has a positive effect throughout our being. If our intention is selfish, we have a negative effect throughout our being. Now, looking at our higher and lower minds in a little bit more detail, we've got the divine influx via our soul, which then passes into our higher mind. And we've got two levels in our higher mind. We've got the celestial level, which is the highest in our higher mind, and then the spiritual level, which is one lower. And both of those levels correspond to angelic societies, the celestial heavens and the spiritual heavens. And the natural level is our lower mind, or lower self, and it has just the one level, but it's made of 3 different degrees, and the degrees are the way it functions. So we start off from the lowest degree, which is our sensual degree, where when we're babies, we're learning about sensual, how to take in sensual information. We grow a little bit older as children, and we're learning about relationships in the world. We're using a middle degree. And then as we become young teenagers and beyond, we're starting to use our rational degree more, where we're looking at the relationship between spiritual concepts. So Our higher mind, it's above our conscious awareness, it's superconscious, and it contains only spiritual substances, being goodness and truths. So, and these goodness and truths are God's, but they're gifted to us to use, as I said before. We get to use them, but we don't own them, they're God's. And our direct influence from God comes through our higher mind. Our lower mind, it provides us with our conscious affections of goodness, our selfish desires, our evils, our cognitions, which are our truths, and our delusions, which relates to our falsities. And the lower mind receives divine influx directly from God via our higher mind and indirectly from angels with us, and it also receives hellish influx from evil spirits with us. Remember that diagram I showed you before with the grey lower mind and the dotted lines where you have the angelic influence above and the hellish influence below? Well, that's what that relates to. So our lower mind, heavenly influx gives us our positive emotions, feelings, thoughts and actions. And receiving heavenly influx leads to improved health and well-being. Whereas hellish influx gives us our negative emotions, feelings, thoughts and actions. And receiving hellish influx leads to destructive behaviour and deteriorating health and well-being. It's basically, hellish influx is basically separating us from others and all of creation. Now, our auric field and physical body, we're going to have a look at that now. Our auric field, now it comprises 7 invisible bodies of ever-increasing vibrational frequency. I'll show you that in the next slide. And it's got 7 main chakras that transfer energy. We've also got chakras in our feet and our hands and other places. And the energy healers use the chakras in their hands to heal. And we've got nadis and meridians, or they can be called meridians, depends whether you're looking at the Indian culture or the Chinese culture. And these distribute energy from our chakras to our organs and our body parts for all of our bodies that we have. You know, one's in our auric field and our physical body. So you can see in this diagram the body, the physical body, and then you've got the etheric body, which is invisible, the emotional body is invisible, the mental body is invisible, and the spiritual body, which is made of 4 bodies, and that's also invisible. And when I was saying in the earlier slide that they're of ever-increasing vibrational frequency, obviously the spiritual body is at bodies are at higher vibrational frequencies than the mental, then the emotional, then the etheric, and lastly the physical. Now, our auric field transforms and stores energy from our mind. We can't just go from our mind to a physical body, right? Everything steps down as it transitions down and its energy is transformed. So our auric field passes the transformed energy to our physical body, and it facilitates our physical functioning and abilities. So, you know, it's not just what's happening in our physical body and our brain. What happens in our auric field basically affects how we operate. Every organ in our physical body has its equivalent on all our invisible bodies. Right? So it's a pretty complex system. And our auric field carries the energies of our personality. So our emotions and feelings, our thoughts and actions, our talents and strengths. Our auric field changes as it receives influx from our lower mind. And therefore our mind indirectly influences our mental, emotional and physical health. And I'm sure that in the future, science will eventually catch up with some of this and be able to prove that these things happen, especially with artificial intelligence and monitoring people's states in the future. They'll be able to make the connections between these sorts of these statements. Now, our energy bodies interact bidirectionally with the energies of our environment. So they protect us. They filter out many of the energies we encounter. They draw in other energies that we need. And our higher mind communicates via our lower mind through our energy bodies and our physical body to express our true self. And our true self is that part of us that basically when we're being heavenly in nature, and our words, our thoughts, our actions, that's when our true self is coming out. And we experience auric field interactions between other beings. So, everything has an aura, and we have auric field interactions between all beings, but in particular between human beings, and we can notice them. Sometimes we'll meet someone and we'll have a feeling, and it's not just body language. We'll feel something in our gut about them, and that feeling is coming through our auric field. Now, our innermost three auric bodies, which on that diagram were the etheric, the emotional, and the mental bodies, they form what's called our invisible physical body. And the important thing about our invisible physical body is that at death, well, this is just an important point, our invisible physical body and physical body are left behind. Our spirit basically disconnects, our spiritual body and our mind and our soul disconnects from our invisible physical body and our physical body. And what happens is our invisible physical body dissipates, and because it's no longer being energized from our spirit downwards, and so it dissolves, and therefore our physical body starts to decompose and decomposes. So that's the importance of knowing about that. Now, our outer four higher auric bodies, they make up our spiritual body. And our spiritual body, of course, it's needed so we can live in the spiritual world as we are right now. And our spiritual body, importantly, that acts as a template for our invisible physical body. But also, our invisible physical body acts as a template for our physical body. So you can see that relationship. Now we'll have a look at our chakras. So these are rotating energy centers within our energy bodies. And the role they perform is to transfer energy from our lower mind and also what's called the universal energy field, which is everything else out there, into our invisible bodies and then to our physical body. So the chakras work on through all the bodies, right, and into the physical body. Right? And then this energy is distributed throughout each of our bodies via a network of nadis or meridians. Now, every chakra corresponds to specific aspects of our behaviour and development. So they're like our invisible bodies in that respect. So this is just the 7 main chakras, and you can see on the right diagram you've got the crown chakra going up and the base chakra going down, but you've got, say, the third eye chakra going forward and back, and likewise with the other chakras getting down to the sacral. And you've got the energy from the chakras which comes in through those dotted lines, and it reaches that vertical line, which is not on our spine, but it's near our spine, and it moves up and down that vertical. It's called our vertical power current, and it moves up and down that vertical power current, and that energy is transmitted through our body. And an interesting thing to know is that when we become spiritually well developed, we get to a point where and I'll talk about this in a few slides ahead, our higher invisible bodies in a spiritual body and our lower bodies, they harmonise. Our chakras, our upper 3 chakras harmonise with our lower 3 chakras. And when that happens, we get a surge of energy down our vertical power current, and we actually feel it. You can actually feel that surge. I felt it, and I know 2 other friends of mine that have also experienced that. And it's basically, it signifies that you've moved from, and I'll cover this ahead, in your level of consciousness, you've moved from a state where you were using your rational mind predominantly, and you've now gone into a stage where you're using your intuitive mind predominantly, right? And you're actually in at that stage, you're more loving. You become more loving, and yeah. I'll cover that.
Just for that previous image, are the colours of any significance? Or
well, they are. They actually, to the people whose spiritual senses have been opened, that's the colours that they look like.
colours, I've read about that. Certain colours are certain spiritual levels have certain colours symbols. So
that's what they look like to people whose senses have been opened.
Yeah.
So as we become spiritually well developed, as I just mentioned, they become our lowest three auric bodies become harmonized with our uppermost three auric bodies, and our lowest three chakras become harmonized with our uppermost three chakras. And this harmonization makes use of our fourth auric body, which is the bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, and also our fourth chakra. It's the same thing there. And then this harmonization has the effect of moving our conscious awareness into our three highest bodies. Now, it's not always in our three highest bodies, but it's more so into our three highest bodies. So it's predominantly into our three highest bodies. And this takes us into the higher aspects of our intent, loves, reason, and intuition. So in Swedenborg's terms, this process takes place as we reform and regenerate, as we grow spiritually. Our intention becomes more courageous, our loves become more heavenly, our reasoning becomes truth and eventually wisdom. And we gain perception and intelligence, true intelligence. So now we'll look at taking God's heavenly qualities into our being. Now, some people think that evil spirits are all nasty, but you know what? Every being in the spiritual universe and physical universe has its role, and in fact, evil spirits allow us to grow spiritually. They play a big part in that process because they stir up the evils inside of us, the negative, selfish aspects inside of us, so that we can see them, and then we have the opportunity to do something about it. So, and that results in temptations when we have a conflict between our higher mind and our lower mind, and our lower mind exercises free will, and it can be out of divine order, not our higher mind. Our higher mind is in divine order. So when we follow our conscience, our lower mind is aligned with our higher mind, and goodness results in our thoughts and actions. Now, temptations serve to soften our vessels in our mind that receive genuine truth, so that they are in a state to receive genuine goodness. So that whole process of being tempted, especially over longer periods of time, if it's a particularly nasty evil that you're working on, that really softens up those vessels in your mind to allow you to receive a lot more goodness and truth eventually into your mind. And the spiritual growth process, it operates as follows. First, you have the stage of repentance, then you have reformation, then you have regeneration. Now, with repentance, it's basically when we realise we have a selfish desire and a false understanding or belief, and then we decide to be rid of this negative aspect. So that's repentance. So nothing's going to happen until we realise about the desire and false understanding and belief, and we decide to get rid of it. Nothing will happen. So assuming that we've gone through repentance, the next step is reformation. And here we gain a new understanding of what is good and true in our life. We're learning about truth and goodness, and we're applying it in our life, and we begin to resist our selfish acts or thoughts in the initial stages. And eventually, we consistently resist our selfish acts or thoughts. And right at the end of the reformation process, we're faced with an ultimate temptation battle, and assuming we successfully win in that battle, note that it's always God that's battling on our behalf, and we're battling with intent only. So don't get proud of any victories in temptation battles. It's always God doing real battling, and we're just battling with intent. So after that final temptation battle, The next phase is regeneration, and in regeneration, God, He gives us peace, He gives us happiness, joy, and other heavenly qualities. Because what happens is angels drive the evil spirits that were harassing us. The angels drive them away from our spirit, our mind, away from our influence, and then we're given peace, happiness, joy, and other heavenly qualities. And as a result, we're also associated with a higher heavenly society, because we're always associated with angels and evil spirits. But as we grow spiritually, we're associated with higher and higher heavenly societies. Now, note that God gives us His goodness and truth during repentance, reformation, and regeneration. All three steps, we're getting His goodness and truth. And as I said before, our evils are pushed aside, away from our awareness, but they're never separated from us. We can always return to our evils, which is not what we should be doing, but we can do it. We shouldn't be doing it. We've gone through all that hard work of the spiritual growth process to be alleviated of those evils, so let's not go back to them. Now, spiritual growth takes place in cycles, so it doesn't happen in one burst and we're all done and dusted. Each cycle lasts varying time, dependent on the nature of the evil we need to overcome. So some of the evils aren't so severe and we can get through that process in a relatively short time. Others are quite severe and it might take several years of working against them to overcome them. But the good news is that the more severe the evil, the greater the spiritual growth that you can have as a result of overcoming it. So we need time and opportunities to recognise each selfish aspect of us that needs changing. Because we can't just work it all out in one hit. Things get brought to us one after another, and we get to work on them, in their own right. So we need time and opportunities to learn and understand or rationalise new truths, and then work to overcome our selfishness. And that's why it's a lifelong proposition, this spiritual development. Now we'll have a look at our spiritual compass. Well, a spiritual compass, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is our conscience. And we all have a complex and multifaceted set of loves and wisdoms from God in our higher mind and lower mind. And each love comprises a set of related affections or goodness, and each wisdom comprises a set of related truths. So they're all working together, the goodness and the truths, the love and the wisdom. And our conscience comes about from affections in our will, in our lower mind, working with truths in our lower mind's understanding. Right? So when they're working together, we end up with feelings, perceptions, and thoughts that guide us or warn us. Right? So following our conscience is following God. When we follow our conscience, our mind is intuitively using its truths. That's important. So it's intuitively using its truths. And we're also following God when we make use of our rational mind and goodness results, although this is not making use of our conscience. Right? Because our conscience is all about our goodness and truths that we know intuitively. And our conscience arises by the activity of angels connected and associated with us, awakening our goodness and truth, and they put this goodness and truth opposite the evils and falsities that evil spirits are stirring up in our mind, and you have this, this battle. As we grow spiritually, our conscience grows stronger and truer, and that's what we should be aiming for. So we develop our conscience by seeking high quality truths and applying them through goodness in our life, right? So we're doing it through goodness, which is we're doing what we believe to be good in our life. It's not always perfect, but we're doing what we believe to be good. And if we want to get the most perfect truths, then we should look to sacred scriptures such as the Bible, which will show us many truths if we search for them. Of course, you can always find truths in everyday life, but as I said, the sacred scriptures are the most perfect. Now, our purpose in life. So it's a big question, and I guess everyone on the planet has probably thought about this one. What's the purpose in life? But only God really knows this. We'll never really know our purpose, but we'll get more and more insights as we live our life. So what God does is he leads us on our purpose in life whenever we are following our conscience. So God has given all of us a unique set of talents he wants us to develop into heavenly strengths. And we live our life purpose as we follow our conscience while exercising our talents and serving our community for the greatest good for all. And that's not just it's not self-sacrificing ourselves for others, it's good of all, which includes us. Now, the ultimate goal while living our life purpose is to grow spiritually. So that's always got to be in the back of our mind. Whatever we're doing, we're going to be using God's gifts in us, but we're also got to be growing spiritually. And spiritual growth involves challenges and difficulties for us in order that we can be made aware of our selfish aspects. So it's not always plain sailing. If it was always plain sailing, most of your evils you never discover them. Right? Now, from realising our selfish aspects, we can then decide to repent, work to reform and regenerate. And God, this is important, God knows us to eternity, and so he always presents us with a perfect environment for us to grow. And also, we are perfectly made to take in his heavenly qualities. That's really what defines us as human beings. Now, let's look at our changes during spiritual development. Now, the late Dr. David Hawkins and his team researched consciousness around the world for over 2 decades. He's written several good books on this topic, such as Power versus Force. And I'd recommend that's a good one to have a look at if you want to read some of his material. Understanding consciousness, it gives us a reference to see our progression spiritually, and we can see where we might end up and what we might be like as we progress spiritually. And in his book, Power versus Force, he gives a chapter looking at all the different levels of consciousness, which I'll cover just ahead. Now, I also cover some of that in my book. Now, consciousness is life from God, his love and wisdom proceeding as an infinite field of energy. Okay? Infinite field of energy. And consciousness is creative potential and creation itself. So it's not just the creation that we currently have, it's the creative potential. And reality is all of life being animate or not, that has ever existed. And reality is recorded in this field of life energy we call consciousness. So there's so much more that God's life is infinite, and we're only getting a glimpse of it in this world. So there is only one consciousness, and all of life is part of this consciousness. So our consciousness results from the overall degree in which life energy from God works through us in our life. Right? So God's life energy passing through our being gives us an awareness in various states or finite perception of the overall reality. Right? So what that means is, depending upon our spiritual development, will depend upon how we perceive reality. As our spiritual state changes from moment to moment through our life, so does our perception of reality, just what I just said. Now, as we develop spiritually, we exercise greater spiritual power in our life, even though a lot of it is unseen. And we gain greater awareness of the overall reality of life. So this means that we see life more for what it truly is, the good and the bad. And there are levels of consciousness which represent the spiritual power from the divine that flows through our being. So in other words, Dr. Hawkins and his team have come up with a map. They've mapped out the different levels of consciousness, and they've done research. And I'll show you that ahead. So these levels of consciousness represent our milestones of spiritual growth. Right, so here we go. This is Dr. Hawkins' team's map of consciousness. And the important line to look at to start with is the line where courage and its emotion is affirmation, and the energy is 200. Now, this energy that's over on the right side, in the right column, it's energy in points, and a point isn't a normal number. The spiritual energy, it varies dramatically from the lower levels to the higher levels, enormously. So what they do is they take the logarithmic, log to the base 10, of the energy, and that becomes the number in points. And I'll show you that in the next slide. Right? But what it means is that if you're down at, say, 200, which is the actual neutral point, so you're down below 200, you're in that falsity. You're predominantly in that falsity mentality state, where you would be predominantly evil and falsity, they go together. And above 200, you're predominantly in truth, goodness and truth, right? So you're predominantly in more angelic states. And you can see up the top there, enlightenment, which is, of course, the ultimate goal, to get into enlightenment. Jesus, the highest numbers recorded for any humans that were on the planet is 1,000. That's what this table goes up to. And people like Jesus was at 1,000, Buddha was at 1,000, Krishna was at 1,000, right? And you can actually measure the level of consciousness of a person, because, as I said earlier, everything is stored in consciousness. Nothing is lost, right? So you can actually find out what a person's level of consciousness is, even though they're past, they're in the past. And they use a technique called muscle monitoring, where a person's muscle tests stronger for a true proposition and it goes weaker for a false proposition. And Dr. Hawkins and his team have made tests, millions of tests on people, on thousands of people, to gauge their level of consciousness, and they map it and map it. So it's pretty cool. So anyway, this is going back to what I was saying about the energy in points. So energy in points equals log 10 of the energy numbers in just normal numbers. For example, an increase in energy level from 200 points to 201 points is not a simple increase of one number. It's a 10-fold increase, because it's 10 to the power of 201 minus 200, which is 10 to the power of 1, which is 10. Right? And likewise, if you increase your level of consciousness from 200 points to 202 points, you will end up with a 100-fold increase in your spiritual power. So you can see, going back to that table, as you go up these numbers, there is a huge increase in spiritual power as you evolve spiritually, even though most of it is unseen. Right? Most of it you can't see and feel. It's just, yeah. So now we've all got many different aspects to our spiritual makeup, and these are our loves and associated wisdoms or foolishness. And also, life energy from God flows through each heavenly aspect of our being according to its degree of spiritual development. So we've got all these different aspects, and God's energy is flowing through them according to its degree of development. And as such, each aspect of our being has its own unique level of consciousness, right? Each aspect. But our overall level of consciousness is the combined effect of these various aspects, right? So we might be well developed in one area of our being, but in another area we're actually the other way around. We're in bad shape. But yet we'll have a good overall level of consciousness. So when our state or level of consciousness changes, our experience of reality changes. That's very important, which happens day to day as we go through different states. And we're actually perceiving reality differently. Now, whether we're happy or sad, fearful or loving, healthy or ill, our experience derives from our level and state of consciousness. So a level of consciousness is sort of semi-permanent. It doesn't change rapidly, whereas our state of consciousness can change very rapidly. That's the difference. And when we're at a high enough level and state of consciousness above courage, right, that middle line at 200, we radiate a beneficial and healing effect on the world. Now, the actual population of the world, Dr. Hawkins in his book, Power versus Force, he writes that the level of consciousness on the planet, going back about 7 years, was at 205, right? But that's because there's a smaller number of people at very high levels of consciousness. They counteract vast numbers at the lower levels, right? Now, as we grow spiritually, God's influx works through our being to a greater extent. The levels of our mind and auric field operate with greater coherency and at higher frequencies. That allows us to have this perception. You know, we can't have that perception unless our being's changing. Right? As a result, we experience higher states or levels of consciousness, or as Swedenborg writes, perception and intelligence. Right? And wisdom. Now we have more of our true self expressed in our personality, our true self, right? And we experience greater heavenly impact in our life. So that's the real benefit, you know, and it's not just us. We're affecting others even though it's out of our conscious awareness. Now, it's possible, given success in the most grievous of temptation battles, for us to ultimately, and when I say ultimately, I mean eventually, right? Because these changes can take time, to increase our level of consciousness by 100 points of energy or more. So what that means is that, you know, we go through the spiritual growth process, we get into, eventually get into regeneration, and it can take time for that regeneration to finalise. You know, if it's a really grievous temptation, it can take a few years. Right? Now, this means that the rate of increase in spiritual power as we grow spiritually can be enormous, as I pointed out before. And people who are spiritually well developed exert a vastly greater positive influence on the world than those people at lower levels. So, and as I said, much of our spiritual influence takes place outside our conscious awareness. So, finally, I'd like to say that throughout history, all the world's great religions and spiritual disciplines have striven to learn and employ practices that allow people to ascend through the levels of consciousness. That's fundamentally what they're doing. Now, I'd like to mention that I have a couple of free downloads from my website. So just type in Kim Bentley into your search engine and you will go to the downloads page on the menu. So I've got a PDF booklet covering the material that I mentioned in this presentation, and it's got a little bit more material in it than what I've spoken about. And my book, An Introduction to Spirituality, that's also a free copy of that. The PDF version's available to be downloaded as well. And there's independent reviews of my book. So thank you for this opportunity to present this work, and I can be reached by my website should you wish to contact me. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Kim. What I'll do is just change the camera so we can see you. Move you so you're not, your face isn't light. There we go. You can see like, what's going on here. I wonder if anyone's got any questions for Kim.
Well, we talked a lot about the human element. I just wonder if there's anything in that, say, with the animal world, or, you know, like does any of that apply to the animal kingdom?
Well, everything has an aura, so
yeah,
that applies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because dogs and dolphins have got a certain consciousness that is just more than what we think. Like they're really intelligent. But yeah, I'm just wondering if any of that applies to anything on the animal kingdom as well.
I don't think that the concept of spiritual development applies to other creatures. You know, I think they're fixed in their development.
Yeah.
And yeah, we as humans have got that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I really enjoy about your work, Kim, is the synthesis of Swedenborg's work with these two other writers as well, and just looking at the way the two, all three, sort of structures of learning kind of interrelate with one another, and I sort of find that fascinating. Yeah. The way, particularly, you talk about the idea of influx. Swedenborg very definitely talks about the way it's also then applied to the auric fields, and so that you've really synthesized all of them together.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that when you read Barbara Brennan's book, Light Emerging is the one to read. Yeah. That'll give you a very good overview of all the good stuff. In her book, Light Emerging, she writes, she describes she describes the higher mind. Yeah. And I think she doesn't really describe it exactly in Swedenborg's terms. The higher mind, the lower mind, etc. But it's what she calls the higher mind and the soul, the core star. Then she calls the lower mind the Auric level, right? And then she's got the auric field and the physical body. So she uses, it's a similar thing. Yeah. It's just not exact. And Swedenborg goes into that side of it in much more detail, which is why, if you're reading about Swedenborg is so powerful, because you get a lot more insight into that side of it. Whereas, when it comes to auric field, Swedenborg has written a little bit about the auric field, not much. Whereas Barbara Brennan, it's a whole space is about the auric field and healing, and so she's really good.
Yeah. So it's often about, when you're doing that work of synthesis, it's often about comparing different terminologies and seeing how they fit together. Was that hard?
It was hard. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely. It was a hard book to write, to pull it all together. It took me a long time to work through it all. Yeah.
So when you say something like, Swedenborg says a little bit about the auric field, can you sort of point to what it is that he does say and what sort of terminology he uses when he's talking about that level?
Yeah, I haven't read a lot of what he's written about the auric field. I've only come across a small amount of material, and he was basically talking about what angels had told him about the auric field and how it's thicker at the front and thinner at the back and that sort of thing. Not the detail that Barbara Brennan goes into. She goes into so much detail.
So, it's not a term Swedenborg uses. What sort of terminology would he use when he's talking auric field? Do you know? Can you recall?
I think the person who was writing about Swedenborg's writings used the term auric field. I think. Because that's the term that we use. Yeah.
I'm familiar with aura. Just the auric field idea was a new one to me prior to reading your book. So it's just interesting.
And the thing is that like Barbara Brennan, she had her spiritual senses opened as a kid, and she could see auras, and she could and it just became more highly developed as she matured. And it's like anything, like all of our understanding about the auric field and the chakras and the meridians, it all has come from people whose spiritual senses have been opened and have been able to see that. And they're no different to a scientist who uses their physical sight to look at something and study it and make observations. It's no different. It's just that most of us don't have our spiritual senses opened like that. So we can't comment. We can't say I've seen this. We have to rely on others.
I particularly like that diagram that you brought up.
But
I was wondering why the physical body and the spiritual body they're both within the auric field.
Well, the physical body is manifest from the auric field.
Right.
Yeah. Could we pop that up on the
screen? Because that was a really interesting diagram, that one.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good one, that one.
I didn't know why you put the two within the one field, and then you said, for God via the physical body, I thought that would have been through the top. Because, and then you write evil spirits in that one there as well. So you wrote the influx from higher mind unites with influx from evil spirits. I was wondering if you could just explain that a bit more. I thought the higher mind will be
Yeah.
evil spirits.
What that means is,
I got a bit strange, that one.
what that means is that, you know, when we're in these selfish states, we're tapping into the influx from evil spirits.
Yeah.
And it gets united with the influx coming from a higher mind, but it corrupts some of that energy influx from a higher mind and distorts it.
Yeah.
And it's harmful to us, you know. And conversely, the influx coming from when we're in you know, states of goodness, we're tapping into angelic influx, which is united in a positive way from the influx from our higher mind, and that goes into the auric field.
Yeah. I like the fact that when you see something positive, you take to it, you cannot unsee it.
Yeah.
And for me, my journey being teaching, I was like, you know, in my 20s and 30s, I was sort of, you know, dabbling in lots of different courses and clubs and stuff, and sort of on one level. And then from that level there, it branches out into more clubs and more courses and further up. And it's just like a staircase. The further up you go, the more things you see. And I can never go back to where I was when I was in my 20s, you know, working as a welder in the factories. That was just, to me, that was just hell. And where I'm sitting now, it's like there's on a higher level looking down. But as you go, because I've seen that, but I've seen something more. So just to keep going more towards, you know, and mixing this more towards these people that, you know, groups like this.
That diagram is the most important page in the book.
That one. Yeah. I love that. I thought that is brilliant.
If you understand that, you really have got the main gist of, you know, being a human being. Yeah. What's going on?
Yeah. Some of the people in their 40s and 50s that I, you know, work with every day, they're just none of this spirituality, there is absolutely nothing there. They're just completely devoid of any religion, God, spirit, just completely kind of empty vessels. And their lives are hell. Yeah. Their lives are utterly hell. There's just nothing there. You're talking about, you know, you've got a spirit, you have a soul, like this. It's just nothing.
Well, the funny thing is that, you know, there's a lot of people out there that pay a lot of attention to their physical health. You know, they're trying to eat right or exercise, etc., but they're not looking after their, like if they were to look after their spiritual health, they can look after their physical health as well.
I say they'll look towards the government and this and that, and the government, they'll be, go beyond the government, towards God. Like, you know, go for the soul, for the spirit. It's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. So it's not all on the government. It's the government.
Yeah, it's just that, you know, we go to school, we don't get taught any of this sort of stuff, so we're just ignorant of it, and we have to trip over it when we're, you know, as adults. We have to trip over it to, you know.
I love that diagram. It's just, I thought, I'm going to take that with me. So there's a lot in that. So, and then I took other photos of other stuff, but that's a catalyst. Yeah, I had anything.
Wonder if there's any questions online from anyone.
What was Swedenborg's equivalent word or phrase for Auric Field?
What we discussed.
Yeah, I don't think we didn't.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Swedenborg wrote directly about it, but I've just come across material that describes the Auric Field. You know, that Swedenborg had been told from angels a little bit about the Auric Field.
So, I mean, I imagine something like, you know, you have that account in the Gospels of the Transfiguration. You know, Jesus takes 3 of the disciples up the mountain and he's transfigured. And there's this great light. And I imagine that the Auric Field is something of that sort of nature. Would that be right?
That could be.
You know, a manifestation of an aura. And so, you know, when Swedenborg has the spiritual experiences and he's experiencing light emanating from a particular being, that's something of their aura.
Yeah, when people are well developed spiritually, they do have a big projection from their chakras. Yeah.
So, and Swedenborg, he describes things in physical terms. So, you know, the Christianity of Swedenborg's time doesn't have aura, a concept of an aura really, that I'm aware of. But, you know, so if he sees it as a light, he's going to describe it as a light. That's what I imagine. So that, Leo, that's about as close as I can get, mate. I don't know what you think, but I think, you know, when he's talking about the light emanating from these beings, and perhaps the, you know, the bright clothing, perhaps, I'm not sure. Could be many things he's describing. Notice, Clifford, you had your hand up too.
Yeah. Hi, Kim. Hi. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I've got one question for you. Are we really given every opportunity to improve ourselves while on Earth?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think we are, because every moment is an opportunity for us. Every single moment, and you know, we don't always get it right, and you know, we go off into the negative states at times, and which just reminds us that we have something to sort out, and you know, and that's a chance to sort of work on that. So, you know, things always have to be stirred up in us for us to see them and to then work on them. So we can't just, if we went through life, you know, blind to our deficiencies, then we wouldn't improve. We'd just be in the comfort zone.
Yeah. You had a line.
Yes, but we have so many deficiencies.
That's right. We all have, and we'll never be rid of all of them. We'll always just be working on them and hopefully getting better and better and improving ourselves. But there'll always be more to work on. It'll never end. That's right.
There was a line in there somewhere that said that God puts us in our environment where we need to be.
Yeah, He always gives the perfect influx,
perfect
to draw upon, to grow. Always, and that's our design. We're designed to take into His influx perfectly. It's the fact that we're human. That's how we're made.
Because to me, that says doesn't matter where you are, where you're born, there is that.
It's an opportunity
to find God.
Yep.
Whether you're in a concentration camp or whether
that's
you're
right.
in, you know, living in a mansion in Toronto, you are in your right environment to rise above your situation.
That's right. And we always it doesn't matter which country we're in, or which city or town or whatever, we always have opportunities to grow, and we choose our course. You know, we make our choices as we live our life, but God is always, from each point where we have the next choice, God is always giving us the best possible thing to choose from if we go with Him.
Does that answer your question, Clifford? Did you have a
Yes. Yes, very much. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. Were there any other questions for Kim? No? That's fine. Got off lightly tonight. Yeah, look, thanks very much, Kim, for your presentation. I'll just remind everybody, you know, to go to Kim's website. I think you said you can
just type my name in, Kim Bentley, B-E-N-T-L-E-Y, and you'll see my website and go to the menu and click on downloads, and you can choose the booklet that covers this presentation, or you can get the copy of the book. They're both in PDF.
Yeah, and you've got your slides in the information booklet, have you?
Not slides, it's actually a booklet.
Oh, but it's got these. Sorry, it's got these images and.
Yes, it has.
Yeah, okay.
And it's got a bit more detail in the presentation.
So we can actually purchase the book.
Yeah,
but only like a physical book, not a, you know.
You can get it. The book's available as an ebook or as a print book.
Print book, yeah. Don't want these stuff.
So if you want to get a print book, what do you do?
The website has got some links, but there's Amazon, there's Barnes and Noble, there's Book Depository, there's Fish Pond, places like that. Yeah.
I'll take a photo of the front cover and then get it off AB Books.
Just grab a copy.
Didn't see that. I'll purchase one after. Usually they're over there somewhere, but I didn't see it over there. Anyway.
No, that's fine. Well, thanks very much, Kim. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing with us. I'm just going to pop into a space where you are, so I can see. I just let you know what's going on in the future. Now, my plan for March is I've invited Guang Bin Lu to come on. Now, Guang turned up at the end of a presentation at the end of last year, and I've asked him to come back, and he's going to do what will be an unusual presentation for us, in that I'm going to advertise it more widely to the to the wider community here. It's going to be bilingual. He's going to talk in English, he's going to talk in Chinese. For those of you who were present a couple of months back when he popped in, Guang runs a Chinese language Swedenborg class. So we spent the last month advertising one of his videos to Chinese speakers in the local area. And we've been getting 200 views a day over the course of a month. And the really interesting thing about it is that, what was it? It was about 45% of viewers have watched the entire thing. So it was a 7-minute video that was advertised, and almost half of the people who watched it watched the whole thing from beginning to end. Now, this is something you're actually allowed to click out of after 5 seconds, and they're watching the whole thing. So it's interesting, we've got this sort of traction. So Guang's going to come back in. The plan is the end of March, I think it's the 31st of March, Guang will come and talk to us on Zoom, of course. I won't be here, Neville will be. Now, whether we've got an on-site face-to-face, I'm not sure. It will depend on Neville. So he'll let you know what's going on with that regard.
Will there be enough people in here?
Sorry?
Will there be enough people to fill this room, or we don't know?
I have no idea.
We'll show up with people.
I'm anticipating we'll kind of have a lot of people on Zoom, I hope.
Yeah.
But if we can have some people face to face, that'd be great too. We'll just see what happens. So we're advertising it and we're giving it a bit of a push. So look, if anybody knows any Chinese speakers who want to join in Guang's class or interested to come along, then let them know. And the other thing I'll just mention is I've produced these cards, and they're just, if I look at one of them, they've just got a quote from Swedenborg, and then it says discover Swedenborg in the middle, and then down the bottom there's a QR code to take you through to the website. Now, what I've been doing with these is just leaving them in places like cafe tables, and when I go through the supermarket, I put one, at the self-service checkout and stuff, just for people to find. So, and we've got 6 different quotes. So if you want a little pack of those, I can't make them available virtually, unless you want to print them off. But I've got some at the back here too. So if anybody's interested in any of those, then feel free to grab those at the back. But look, I'll say good night to those of you online, and we'll have a cup of tea, and we'll hopefully look forward to seeing you all next month. Okay? Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Thanks again to Kim for the presentation. It's been excellent.